Hi everyone, this is Michael Fan. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Michael Fan. I'm half Malaysian, Chinese, Asian American. Graduated from UC Davis 2019.
I'm Elsie. Elsie Gross. I know Nora through a friend, and I am half Filipino, half white, living in Sacramento, California.
Hi, my name is Matt. I am 21 years old, and I am Filipino and mixed race white.
Are you a student at UC Davis?
Yes, I am. I'm a student at UC Davis, entering my senior year.
Hello, I'm Dulcinea. I'm going to be a senior in design.
I am a fourth year chemistry student. I'm Asian, Japanese, and Russian. So those are my two. But I normally kind of just say white/Caucasian, just so people don't ask.
I would say it was pretty chill for the most part because California is pretty diverse to begin with. I actually happen to meet a lot of half Asian friends as well, so the majority of my friends are also just like me. Culturally, my dad focused a lot on trying to keep his values and traditions from when he was a kid. Even though he came to the US pretty young, we celebrated a lot of it.
It's pretty good. I think it's helpful being in a diverse part of the country, whereas other parts, like I had a friend that moved to Texas briefly. Texas has a big Korean population, and the particular part she was in, it was more Hispanic. So I'll go to like other parts of NorCal too, and you don't see a lot of Asian people there, let alone like mixed Asian or people who have immigrated from Asia, like my mom.
I wasn't really aware that I had a culture. Like in a way, like I had one, and my mom and did it very, very well to kind of make sure I had that, kind of indoctrinate me to the ways of the Philippines growing up. But I never learned the language, and I never something I have to catch up on now, and I never really felt like I was like I could claim the Philippines.
It was really easy for me in the sense that my dad is Chinese and my mom is white, and we live in a fairly diverse area of San Jose. So it was never too much of an issue in the sense that there was a decent amount of interracial couples in the neighborhood and at my elementary school. And so when I was really young, it didn't matter nearly as much. It was pretty normal. So got really lucky with that.
Yeah. So we lived like an hour away from the rest of my Japanese family, so we would only go over there for Thanksgiving, Easter, Christmas, and one time in March or so, just to see them. We definitely had a lot of really strange traditions that I didn't realize were weird until I met other people that would show me their family traditions and stuff like that. Just random Japanese food mixed in with American values. It's a weird melting pot of everything that we all are. It's mostly Japanese, but we have people that have married into the family that are Mexican or just plain white, turkey and mashed potatoes.
I would say so. I hope I'm using this word right, but code switching, I feel like I definitely code switch depending on who I talk to. Sometimes if I'm in more of an Asian dominant group, I try to emphasize that I'm half Asian because I feel like it's weird if I try to talk about things with people and they're like, oh, what is this white guy doing here,
Yes and no. It's weird being the token person. And then sometimes I feel pressure to be outwardly more Asian, when it comes to food maybe, but it's complicated. Usually in my friend groups in particular, it's pretty chill, but sometimes I'll enter another group and they're like, oh, I'll make the thing or whatever, or I'm expected to know Asia stuff and whatnot.
Yeah, it's the entire history, and you're like, ah.
Yeah.
Certain kinds of groups that you hang out with accentuate kind of different parts of your personality. Especially with Filipino family members and functions like that, it's fun. It's a very, very familial, very, very food-based kind of show up with a gift kind of atmosphere. There's these kinds of traditions that are more highlighted, and then with my my other family, my white family, it's more anything goes. It's still warm and familial. It's still very loud and outspoken. Luckily, the two sides of my family really mesh like that.
Yeah, I feel like there's some gatekeepers, but there's also on the other side people maybe feel insecure that they're not Asian enough, as happens. I've noticed that, and some of my friends are like, "Oh, you're way more Asian than me," and I'm like, "Oh, I don't know what you mean." But I do find that there are some people that they're like, "Oh, you're not Asian enough," so I have to like prove to them I'm Asian and be like, "Look, my last name, Fan. I speak Mandarin, sometimes Cantonese if I'm feeling happy about it. The boys got Asian grandmas and stuff like that." So
I have not experienced half Asians try to do gatekeeping and out Asian each other, but I have witnessed it on the internet, and it's not fun to watch. But no one in my life has done that, luckily.
Yeah, definitely. Like, the people that I've met that are also like mixed Asian have been okay, but it's like people that are like more traditional Japanese families are very much just like, you're not Japanese because you don't like participate in the culture like fully right now. I mean, I kind of get that, but at the same time, it's like I grew up in a certain culture as well.
yeah, I feel like because we don't really have one foot fully in either sides, that really showing that you're putting effort into being a part of the group. Like for my half Asian friends, I know they try really hard to learn the language that they're associated with. For me, when I came to UC Davis, I had the chance to learn Mandarin, and I was like, "Oh heck yeah, I want to learn Mandarin." And then my dad was like, "Well, we usually speak Cantonese." And I was like, "Well, I wasted my time then." I have to take the time to like. So I travel a little bit. When I went to Malaysia, I'll work there, but flying around, it's pretty cheap. So when I flew to other places, I definitely put in a lot of effort to try and learn their language, to not be that like token white guy that's just like, "Hello, American English, help me out here, please." I didn't want to perpetuate that anymore.
So I grew up in NorCal, so I know English, but unfortunately, my mom never taught me. So, I can't remember if I told you this story, but when I went to the Philippines in December, it's like the first time I've been as an adult, like remembering stuff. I learned from my cousin, not even my mom, but my cousin told me that they don't speak Tagalog, they speak Bisaya. So I was trying to learn the wrong language. She never corrected me. I bought a Tagalog book too, and I showed it to her.
I didn't even know there's two different languages.
There's a few there's like 3 main ones. Like most people in Manila know Tagalog. So like when my cousin went to school in Manila, they're like, "Oh, you speak Tagalog? Or you only speak that other language," like looking down on them. So it's very complicated, because then there's discrimination in like what language you know. But then, I mean, no matter where you are, because then there's different dialects too. It's like, even if I were Japanese and I didn't learn Japanese, it's like, oh, which Japanese should I learn? Like, is there a particular dialect I should be looking for? Am I gonna sound weird anyway, even if I do learn it? Like, what's the point? And then you get sad and depressed about it.
Yeah, I feel that, like, especially like for Korea, like there's different accents depending on which region you're from, and so like sometimes people are like, you have a Shigor accent, which is like countryside accent, then they're like, "Oh, you're like country trash and you're uneducated." And
oh goodness, yeah. Everyone's got it.
And they're all like, "You're all brown babies, and we like the pale, like white babies because of colorism." And it's like, it's just a regional thing, but it's terrible.
Hilariously enough, I don't speak Chinese. I speak Spanish and I speak English. You know this. A lot of people know this. My name is also, of Spanish origin. It's Dulcinea. And my last name is Chinese and also German. So it's a really fun thing. Language is really big. Neither of my parents speak Chinese or German. They both speak English. My dad knows a little bit, but he promptly forgot it as he grew up because it was safer for him. It really just was. He grew up in kind of the less affluent areas of Los Angeles in the 60s, and people were still pretty freaked out about Chinese people, and being first gen to go to college, I think he kind of had to really assimilate. He had to really force himself. And so when I grew up, my parents were, my mom really wanted me to learn Chinese or learn Spanish, but my dad was really insistent that he was not okay. He didn't want us to be traumatized by the same experience. And I think a lot of second gen kids get this, where their parents are like, you can't learn our native original language because then you won't speak English. It's like, but you speak English, so there's clearly that's not the issue anymore. So it makes interacting with my dad's side a little bit harder. My grandmother speaks very little English, mostly Cantonese, and then my cousin's wife speaks Mandarin, so that doesn't help. And then my aunt speaks Cantonese, but isn't on great terms with my grandmother, so oftentimes it's hard to get her to translate for us.
I think it's definitely a cultural bridge. I'd like to know more Tagalog, but the more of that language I know, the more entrenched in the culture I feel, which is probably why, being an English-speaking person in year 2020 in California, I feel very, very disconnected from a lot of Filipino culture. It's more like a subset, I'd say, of Filipino culture that I am, which is mixed race Filipino or like Filipino American, definitely less traditional Filipino.
But my grandma Takeda, she only spoke Japanese. She didn't speak English at all. So we'd go to family events and we'd speak like a Japanese English hybrid kind of. So to this day, I don't know any actual Japanese, but I could kind of get what she was trying to say to me, But it would have been really cool to talk to her about her time, because she lived in Japan and Hawaii, and then they were put in the internment camps by San Jose, and so I just hearing her story would have been super cool. And it sucks that I didn't know Japanese to be able to hear all that.
Do you think any of your other family members might know, or is it something that she kept to herself?
Actually, it's really big in Japanese culture, especially higher society, to keep a very detailed log of everyone in your family. So I have books and binders just full of our family heritage, but unfortunately some of it is in Japanese, which I don't know. But there are some in English, the newer ones, which I'm hoping my mom still has, because I know I'd definitely be interested in reading some of those.
Yeah, so I've had it happen where, for the most part, I look very white. I look predominantly white, so a lot of people don't even make the association that I'm half Asian. But if I do have a friend, or it comes up in a conversation, oh, you're not Asian, you don't know what we're talking about. I'm like, actually, I am. And then that starts the conversation going. And then when they see that, they kind of look past most other aspects. It's more oh, Michael's the half Asian guy. It's not Michael's the funny guy, he's the half Asian guy. I feel I feel it's a key to some people, a connection. If you go to a place that you're not familiar with, you obviously look around for people who you might find a connection to. And for the most part, people, if they are Asian and they talk to me, as soon as they find out that I'm half Asian, I feel they feel more comfortable communicating with me and hanging out with me, because they're oh, he understands some of my situations and my upbringings and stuff.
Yeah, I definitely look as if I've inherited my dad's side, because he's from southern China, which I'm sure but in case other people don't know, they tend to be a little bit more tan, and their features are not the stereotypical narrow features of Chinese people. I get a lot of surprise from other Chinese people. They're oh, you're very tan and very brown and not so petite, and I'm that's really not cool to be pointing out. That really doesn't make any difference. But yeah, when I'm with my dad, we look very similar, so I get really lucky in that sense. I also get very lucky in the sense that I'm pretty open about being adopted, so I can kind of throw that away when people look at my mom and I weirdly. But I don't always want to do that. We definitely go to stores together and wait in lines, and we'll be chatting, and then when I walk up with her to the register, sometimes the cashiers would be a bit taken aback, mostly by other Asian people. Weirdly enough. Yeah, on Ancestry.com or something like that.
Yeah, the DNA testing is opening a lot of doors.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure mine's gonna be all right, so you're Chinese and then a little bit of European, and we all know where that comes from.
Yeah. Colonialism.
Yeah, well, because I was from a town close to Hong Kong, and we all know how that went. So
I think so. I think there's definitely been times where, like, you're around a Filipino family that I'm not close with, like your brother's sister's auntie, who's not actually your auntie, but you call her that because you grew up in the same village, like something like that. Like that kind of like vibe when you're just like, there are things that you should know, or you feel like you should know, but you don't. It's weird, but like, the closer the family is, the less it feels bad, or the less it feels like, I'm divorced from you.
Definitely, yeah. That's why I kind of sometimes I just say that I'm white, unless I'm like talking to someone else, and like if I'm talking about something that would only make sense if I like was Japanese, like how my family like has sushi at Thanksgiving, and like we eat a lot of red bean paste.
Yeah, for sure. Not even just like me personally, but I have friends that are Filipino, and I know the Filipino culture is pretty intense with colorism because there's definitely people who have lighter skin when they're Filipino, and there's a lot of people who have darker, deeper color skin, and there's definitely a divide where they're like, oh, you're not Filipino because you're not dark enough, or you're not Filipino because you're not white enough.
Yes. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm Asian enough, or I don't feel like I'm white enough. In grade school, I didn't meet a lot of kids like me. Usually in elementary school, I'd be the only Asian kid in class. I think maybe it might have been internal till high school. Everyone was pretty chill. And then occasionally I get like a microaggressive comment every once in a while in high school, but it wasn't often either, so that was nice. I did have Asian teachers in high school, so that helped.
I mean, I'm not proud to say that I do think that. I really, but I mean, like, I'm facing the facts, and like, there's a huge history of like, imperialism and colonialism that has led to this forced view that like smaller and more petite and whiter is always better. And then you see that a lot in the advertising, and you see that a lot in the culture and in the foot binding that, it's now out loud, but there's a lot of that whole, Eurocentric kind of emphasis. And I think that leads to a lot of Asian people having this conception that like, yeah, you're valid and everything, but like you would be more valid if you were whiter, but you shouldn't be white. Like, and I did get a lot of stigma growing up about being adopted. I got a lot of like, you weren't wanted, like you should have died, from back in my days, you weren't really their daughter, you were bought, you were just this like token. I got a lot of that. Now that I'm older, it's like, actually I was more wanted because they chose me, it's like that's kind of the common comeback they tell a lot of adopted kids to say, no, actually they chose me. But yeah, kids don't understand adoption super well, or like if they're not from an intercultural family, they don't really understand that like we do things that on my mom's side, like we celebrate Christmas and stuff, but we also do the whole traditional New Year thing. Like they don't really get that duality.
I have two brothers, and they're both much paler than I am. Not very dark to begin with, but they are much paler than I am. They have different Filipino features. When we went back to the Philippines, they got picked on a lot, or like, it was pointed out a lot that they were much paler, that they were much more white looking.
I think it's just, you don't have to be one thing or the other. Like, you don't have to be Asian or white. It's kind of like how gender has the spectrum. I feel like people should start looking at race more as like a spectrum than a binary, which I mean can go for a lot of things, but I feel like that would be it would garner a lot more acceptance for a lot of people if you just look at them as like people, and instead of like this person is Asian and this person is white and this person,
So I was reading this question, and I had like a lot to say about it because I was thinking about it quite a bit.
Spill the tea.
Yeah, my older sister is married to an African American guy, and my younger sister was dating an Indian guy for a while. For the most part, I've dated mostly Asian girls, and some of my friends were like, "Oh, you've got like yellow fever," and I was like, "Well, that's being mixed race plays." People look at me and I look ambiguous sometimes, and so like, oh well, he looks white, so what else is there to it? There's definitely people who feel betrayed sometimes, or people make the assumption that
I've never met anyone like that. I have seen it on the internet, like on the Subtle Filipino Traits and the Subtle Asian Traits page. I've seen people complain about other people posting their white girlfriends or something, but luckily where I'm located and the circles I'm in, I haven't met anyone who has felt betrayed, and my mom doesn't feel betrayed either. That I have all my boyfriends have been white, and then I don't feel any kind of pressure to date within my ethnic background. I could date whoever I want, which is pretty freeing and nice.
I would say like when I got closer to high school and closer to like late middle school, mostly when I started dating someone who was white, that's when I started getting a lot more of the weird side eyes and a lot more of the kind of not so subtle questions. Yeah, I think it was the kind of thing where they were wondering why I would like stay outside of my race kind of thing, you know, and for as progressive as the part of the area I'm in, it's still a little bit conservative in certain ways. Like it seems both as if you're betraying your culture, like you said, but also as if you're it's weird, you know, they're both very proud of you, they're like, good for you, and they're also, but like, why? And it's very confusing in the sense that it's like, why does it matter? Yeah, I think it's definitely like a weird betrayal, or like, it's like, oh, that Chinese girl is trying to be white, now she's dating a white dude, and now that I'm dating someone who's Asian, it's like, oh, finally, within your race, and it's like, not actually. And now it's this whole like, oh, now it's the other side of like, where different groups of people who are Asian have troubled past with other groups of Asian people, and that's a new side to have to deal with. That's always real fun.
It's always the conflict, like, why are you dating outside of your race? And then when it's within your race, they're like, why are you dating that kind of Asian? Because there's tension there.
Yeah, and it's like, what does that mean?
It's like, what do you want?
It's like, I can't win. Should I just not date? But then it's like, oh, but you're never gonna get married and have kids. It's like, whoa, but if you get married, it's like you're married too young. I'm like, I don't understand any of it. I think people think for some reason that interracial dating is different, and then there are some differences, but I don't think everyone goes out to date someone of the opposite race and be like, all right, you're not Chinese, let's go. Like, some people obviously do, but I don't think it's necessarily at the forefront of your thought when you start dating people. I think your first thought is like, are they a good person and are they cute?
What's wrong? Can't you talk?
I mean, if I'm included in that group, I'd be happy about it. But I don't know. I do think I've noticed when I watch TV, and especially Netflix, a lot of their cast members are mixed Asian. Like, I'll be watching, I'll be like, oh, that girl is half Filipino. I can tell. Maybe they're casting them because, you know, people have a preference to that look or some way. It's not, I mean, I'm not gonna be mad that people think half Asians are better looking. Like, you know, if I'm in the better looking group, that's cool. But I don't know, I definitely have had a few friends of mine be like, oh yeah, like half Asian, half black girls are like the best. And I was like, okay, that's kind of
yeah. It's I think it's very much like a sex thing, like sex appeal, and just like the whole just like how race and sexualization of individuals, particularly women, work. Don't ask why, but I just know that especially in the porn industry, like Asian women are like always sexualized, or like one of the top after like white girls, and then Asian men usually are like at the bottom, and then black men are like at the top.
People say like, oh, you've got, you know, good Asian genes, and I was like, well, what are bad Asian genes? You know, like, what do you mean?
Recently, there's been a trend called the fox eye trend. So like Asians naturally, like me, I have like a little bit of a fox eye, right? That's like how it's shaped. And just because that's like when we do makeup, it looks like that. I personally think there's different types of makeup styles, and some make your eyes look rounder, some make it look longer. That's fine. But a lot of them, like the TikTok stars, were posting like this, like fox eye trend, and going like that. Yeah.
It's kind of weird because, you know, I don't know, elementary school, people made, I was weird. When I was younger, I was like super Asian, like mega full haircut, chinky eyed. I wore like the exemplary little Asian boy outfit every single day. Grew up, I turned white and I lost it all. But when I was a kid, I know people still made fun of me for the chinky eyes. I didn't understand it at the time, but now that now they're kind of using it as a way to remystify or re-exotify themselves. But I feel like Asian presence in media is becoming more common, and as it becomes more common, people are looking for that next thing that's like not rare but unique. And I feel like the half Asian group is definitely kind of being, wow, you're I can't tell what you are, you're so exotic, like there's so many things you could be, and you're like, well, I'm a human being first. For one, I think that if you're a good actor and the director feels like you fit that role well, then it really shouldn't matter your background. I know for I can't think of it right now. It's the Korean sitcom on Netflix.
Kim's Convenience?
Kim's Convenience.
Yes.
I know one of the actors isn't Korean though. He's
the son. He's Chinese, but I love him. So
I know.
good.
I love Simu Liu. He's so cool. But I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, oh, is that same thing where it's like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like people call it implied yellow face, but like because it's like they're not really, because like we get upset when everyone says all Asians are Chinese. So if a Korean role is played by a Chinese man, then like there might be an issue there too, because then it's following the stereotype. But also it's like, especially the industry, it's really hard to find people who have, one, in the Asian community who are prominent actors, and two, Asian to begin with, and two, who can fit the role really well. And so, I do see problems, but sometimes I'm like, maybe we're just not there yet.
Yeah, so I'm like, I'm not upset that he's not fully Korean. I'm happy that he got the job. Like, go see me, Lou. Like, all for you, dude. Get that money.
Asian
and maybe
representation.
Asian representation. Maybe it's just that there aren't enough Korean male actors right now that are even being looked at, and maybe that's where the problem lies.
It's kind of awkward, because I don't think any race is objectively more pretty than any other race. And then the topic of racial preference is tough topic that I'm not going to dip into. Maybe they don't talk about it, and perhaps them seeking out mixed individuals might be some veiled form of racism that they're trying to go, but I do like brown people, just when they're half white.
I've noticed that a lot too. It's like people think the races cancel each other out, and it's like, no, I have a background in both. Thanks.
And then like harassment is more like, I would get more harassment than discrimination, like people catcalling me or calling me exotic. Sometimes that was pretty not cool.
Yeah, like, I think a lot of people forget that when they think of other countries like China or like Africa, they think of these really rural, like kind of like, slightly destroyed, a little bit run down,
impoverished,
impoverished places. And like, it's like, no, both of these large countries and continents, Asia and Africa, like they have a lot of really good things for them, but they also have some things that are like need a little bit more help. But that's just like every single country and continent. Ooh, this one's tough. This one's tough because I've seen a lot of both. I've seen a lot of like weird like fetishization. Like my sister has experienced a lot of that weird like, hey, you're mixed race. Whoa. And it's like, it's not that uncommon. But I've also seen a lot of like weird stereotypes where like I think a lot of times people think mixed race families have a lot more like inner turmoil than they do. I think you grow up in that kind of situation where you have like this duality of cultures, and you're like, this is it, this is my normal, and that like me is like there's this huge struggle between like the Chinese culture and like the other culture they're mixed with, and like how do they like come together? It's like usually they fuse together pretty well because the family decides what parts of each culture they want to incorporate into their lives. But I also see a lot of weird like fetishization of it, like not even just in media, but in like it's kind of this whole thing where it's like, oh wow, like mixed race babies are so cute, and I'm like, that's a creepy thing to say.
Yep.
Or like they tell black people who are dating like people who aren't black, or like, oh, your babies would be really cute, and it's like, that's a weird thing to say to people. Stop it, not cool. But then media's been way better about showing mixed race couples and showing how it's just like there is some cultural differences, but they are doing great. They're doing fine.
The Japanese part of my mom was fine. My dad is significantly older than my mom, so it was kind of like the young Asian like trophy wife type deal that they got a lot, which isn't really true. I mean, like they were definitely like equal partners, but like at the time they would definitely get people like being like, oh, is that your new like wife, who's like 20 years younger than you and like Asian, The thing with my mom's, I think it was my grandma Takeda, like there was a long line of arranged marriages in my family too. So it was like really interesting to hear about that because like my grandma Takeda was an arranged marriage, and she would I actually heard these stories after she died, but she would like they would sneak around and try to like catch glimpses of their like husbands that they were like arranged to and stuff. And I just thought that was like really interesting.
Yeah, I also find that comment really interesting. Like a white dude and then an Asian girl, people are like, oh, this is a little sketchy. But if it's like an Asian dude and then a white girl, they're like, oh, they're a contemporary couple. Like I get that a lot on like social media, like where they're like, if it depending on who's the male role and who's Asian, a lot of people are like, oh, this is disturbing colonialist ideals, or this one is like super modern and accepting of cultures. And do you think that is flawed inherently, or is there some truth to that?
Oh, definitely flawed for sure. Especially like Asian women are very much portrayed as like one way, like skinny, generally well off, and like generally like going after like older men and don't really have their own like path in life, or they're kind of more like side characters in a lot of things too. There's very rarely like an Asian like front man or like Asian like main character. And it actually came out about the Oscars too a while ago, how like less than like 0.1% or were Asian. And it's definitely like it's very different in the media versus real life for sure. The way that the world is going, we're all gonna end up being pretty mixed anyway. Like unless you're like a eugenics like white person who really wants to stay the bloodline or whatever. But
marry
like,
your cousins.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like it's kind of a good and bad situation. Like you shouldn't put them on a pedestal, but you also like, and you shouldn't celebrate them just for being mixed. Like that shouldn't be part of it. But at the same time, it's like giving people a chance to like be exposed to other cultures and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of like a double-edged sword where like the more exposure that they have, like the more people will learn about like different cultures and things. Because like I know some Markiplier stans when I was like younger who were like obsessed with him and started learning a lot more about like, I think he's like, is he Korean, right?
Yeah, he's Korean, and I think he's American. His father was American, but like German or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure people learning about his Asian side of his like identity and stuff like that, and it actually like got them to like be less bigoted about it. So a give and take.
I think I've got like a great, like for me, I've got a great position being like a white looking cis male that like people are like, oh, like, this guy probably relates to me in some way. I think that I have the opportunity to really amplify a lot of voices and a lot of things people say, because I have cousins on my side that are on Facebook and they love to argue and they love to post racist stuff all the time. Same as when someone says something racist towards Asians and they look to me for support. People say the same. They'll do the same thing for African Americans. My brother-in-law is African American, so it's even like more. I feel like it's more on me because my nephew and my niece, the same thing that's going on right now is going to happen to them if I don't, use my voice.
They can encourage their fellow Asians to be more active, because I know Asian Americans kind of suffer from being the model minority. A lot of the time, even though it's not true, with COVID, we're also discriminated, like take your virus back and other stuff like that. A lot of famous people, and I think Markiplier has said like Black lives do matter, and they can put their voice in and tell other people that relate to them that it's a good idea to. It's just good to stand up for other minorities like Latinx people and Black people and so on.
I make no claim to speak for the Asian community, or like anything. All individuals. Now they've got that disclaimer out of the way. I think the way forward is, being allies and being supportive of the Black movement, because racial justice isn't just for one race. It's a kind of bilateral. Anything good in terms of racial justice for Black men and women is also good for the Asian community. So that's brilliant.
The Black Lives Matter movement is just amazing and critical, and a critical part of our time, especially during the pandemic. I try really hard to re-educate myself and to address my own issues before preaching about it to other people. I try really hard to think about things before I post them or share them, even if they're on stories, because I want to make sure that I'm catching things, that I'm actively thinking and critically thinking. I would like to be better at that, and that's something I am improving on, is educating myself and making sure that I am not centering myself as the center of this conversation, and that I can, if they deem me an ally, I can make sure I step up to that plate, and I can make sure to, outlast those who are burned out, because it is a privilege, to get burned out and turn your phone off away from it.